Welcome to Plus One Forward, the podcast powered by the Apocalypse, where we talk about tabletop role-playing games using or inspired by the Apocalypse engine. This episode continues our summer series about belonging outside belonging games. I'm your MC, Rach.
And I'm Rich. Tonight, we're joined by our guest, Luke of Games from the Wildwood. Hey, Luke, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, Luke, I have to know, how did you get started with belonging outside belonging games?
Yeah, so my history with belonging outside belonging goes back before it was called that. I read the original version of Dream Askew back in 2016, 2017.
Wow.
And it was one of the major design inspirations on the first game I ever published. So weirdly, it feels like Dream Askew now having been properly republished and Belonging Outside Belonging now existing, I've kind of come full circle, which is nice.
What was your first experience? Which one did you play? I mean, reading's reading, but...
Yeah, when it came to playing, on my podcast, we played the playtest version of Dream Askew, which was an interesting experience because, obviously, the book, with its substantive answers about, how Bob works didn't exist yet.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
And so we were just kind of, squinting at it, and I was like, all right, I've listened to some other actual play podcasts. I think we're cobbling together an understanding here, but it was a really good time, and thankfully, that's a group with really strong instincts, and so we were able to kind of, smooth over the gaps.
Nice. Why don't we jump on over here and spin the token?
Spend a token.
Luke, you wanted to, in our little discussion of things happening at the table, if at all related to belonging outside belonging, we'd appreciate it. It seems like you might have something that's pretty cool here. Talking a little bit about setting elements and moves. Why don't you kick that off?
I think one of the great challenges of belonging outside belonging games is that idle dreaming, this mode of talking and imagining and asking questions, is really cool and really fun, but sometimes massaging the transition between idle dreaming and scenes, particularly the first scene, can be quite tricky. Mm-hmm. Just finding that path. And so I've been thinking a lot recently about setting elements and the ways in which they and their moves are not just beats within a scene, a character's moves are, but can also be scene framing. And I think there's some real precedent for this in some of Avery's other PBTA work. Most of Monster Hearts' moves are normal MC moves, but put them together is both a move you can make inside a scene, but it's also a move where you can just be cool, now we're gonna have a scene with the werewolf and the ghost and you're together, and now let's do that scene.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and I think looking through the setting element moves in both Dream Askew and Dream Apart, a lot of those moves are the kind of things that open a scene really nicely and frame, here is a scene and here is kind of an indication what it's about or what it's in the shadow of. A lot of them are introduce an NPC of X kind, which is a great way to kind of be cool, now we're gonna have a scene where we as the audience meet this NPC, or Dream Apart has put the wild forest in someone's way. Okay, cool, now we're gonna have a scene of the wild forest being in someone's way, and maybe they go around it, maybe they go through it, and maybe they have a conversation with another character about it. There's a lot of ways that can go, but that gets us into a scene and breaks the ice, and then we can kind of figure out, okay, what is this scene about, and kind of play back and forth a little.
That's really cool. I'm a little baby Bob gamer. I've only played a wee bit, and I'm still finding my way. That said, it's very different from the GM-led role, and in my experience, it's been, okay, we pick out the playbooks, and we have all the questions, and we really are excited and jazzed for scenes, and we have ideas, but then getting started. And the idea of taking those setting elements, moves, and using that to frame a scene, I find that really compelling. I super want to give that a shot. How successful has that been for you with folks who are not kind of well-versed in the Bob world, being pulled into a scene with that kind of approach?
It's worked pretty well. And I think particularly because, I think a thing that is really true about facilitating Bob games is that there is a balance you have to strike between, like, on the one hand, it's very easy for the most experienced player's voice to become the loudest in a way that is, like, shit and negative. But also, sometimes setting a strong example gives people permission and helps them feel able to do things. I think the thing I've seen most success with this approach, and for what it's worth, like, structural level move play is probably more accurate than just scene framing, because, like, you can do it in the middle of a scene and reframe a scene or, like, turn the way a scene is going too. But yeah, I think the most success I've seen with it is just, like, knowing that that moment of hesitation, that pause is probably going to happen, holding back to see, like, if it's going to naturally resolve itself, and then if it doesn't, being like, all right, cool, I'm going to give the game that, like, push of momentum out the gate. I'm going to do a really bold version of this so that everyone becomes comfortable with the idea of, like, okay, setting elements exist in this game. We're allowed to pick them up. We're allowed to make setting element moves. We're allowed to use that to, like, really shape things in that mode of authority that we normally think of as, like, GM level, quote unquote. And so I think it's really good at breaking that ice and, like, breaking that hesitance for people who come to Bob with an experience of playing games and being used to the existence of a hierarchy in which there is a GM who isn't them. And breaking out of that mode can often be kind of like a little bit of a challenge.
To take it in a slightly different direction, we've looked a little bit about how the moves in the settings reflect, in certain cases, the GM moves in Powered by the Apocalypse games. Say I've GM'd a lot of Powered by the Apocalypse games, and I'm sitting down in my first Bob game, and I see those moves and see how they work, and I already know the basic flow of how this could go down. How do I really bring my A game? Are there any thoughtful ways that a player could challenge themselves with setting elements beyond just getting used to how they work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think a lot of it is to resist the impulse to escalate. I think PBTA, in large part because of, like, the DNA of Apocalypse World and the genre that it is, like, based in, does exist very much within the, like, dominant Western paradigm of rise and fall, crisis-driven, resolution-driven storytelling. And Bob kind of doesn't. Like, I think Bob is at its strongest where you're like, it's more like slice of life. It's just slice of life where drama also happens. But think even outside of that, like, and then there's a beginning, and then there's a middle, and then there's rising action, and then there's, like, falling action for a bit, and then there's, like, I don't remember what the next step is, and then there's the climax. Like, breaking away from that really helps. And so, like, don't reach for the move and don't reach for the setting element that is going to straightforwardly escalate the scene. Escalate and add momentum sideways. And keep it in that space of, like, okay, what are the kind of things in community that make situations more fraught? And often it's not, and then we have a massive blowout argument, or, like, and then a gang shows up and starts shooting everyone. It's like, and then, like, there's some underlying, like, cultural pressure that is, like, actually informing what's going on. And so, yeah, just, like, think more broadly about what adding momentum and, like, ramping up tension and what escalation means and whether it is appropriate.
And Luke, what's your personal favorite thing to do with a setting element in a Bob game?
Oof. There's a question. I have a brand. I like to make things sad. I'm always looking for, like, if I can, like, reframe things to be tragic or, like, add some poignancy to things we thought we knew. Like, that's always pretty good.
It sounds to me like, Luke, perhaps an analogy of how to perceive, say, a PBTA game versus a Bob game is that a PBTA game might be a scrappy, action-y kind of movie, but a Bob game is that, like, indie flick that you like, and it has some drama, but it's definitely a lot more low-key, and everything is a little more subtle. Is that a kind of analogy that works from what we're talking about right now?
Yeah. I mean, I think like any analogy and like any generalization, like it doesn't hold true in all cases, and it is somewhat reductive. But like, so is what I said to start with. So that's fair. Yeah, I think that's not a bad way to think about it. Just like, I often talk about like PBTA as being like an ecology, right? Like it's like a garden, and there's a bunch of like interrelated systems, and like changes snowball downhill. I think a key thing to remember is that, like, if PBTA is a garden and an ecosystem, Bob games are obviously a community. And things don't so much snowball downhill in a community as they ripple out. And so you don't have to look for where gravity can drive things downhill. Just look for, how does this affect other people? How does this affect the community at large? How does this affect the wider world? And where is room there that you can push?
Yeah, I dig that.
That was really thoughtful.
For what it's worth, in this analogy, Forged in the Dark is like a big factory.
This is a very strange town.
Yeah. Because it's like, Forged in the Dark has a lot of really like mechanical loops that are very precise and neat. As opposed to just like, snowballs rolling off in directions and the removal of one plant species, like causing a catastrophic cascade failure of the garden.
You also play as the... That brings us to our next segment, You Also Play as the, where our guest will share with us a Belonging Outside Belonging game. Luke, why don't you tell us a bit about your game?
The game of mine that I'm kind of like interested to talk about is called Grand Guignol. It is a game of queer intimate horror in a haunted Gothic city. And in a lot of ways, it's my love letter to my university degree.
What was your university degree in?
I did a double major. Part of it was in anthropology, which is the rest of my game design. And then the other half was in English. And so I did a lot of courses on like queering the Gothic over the course of my degree. Like I must have written something like 11 or 12 essays across various courses on some version of that or another.
So your game goes quite in depth in this concept of queering the Gothic. For anyone who hasn't read Grand Guignol yet, what do you mean by that?
There's a little mini essay in the game, kind of like address this question at length, because I think it is an important thing to talk about. But there's a line from it, gender and queerness are the sites in which Gothic horror is rooted, which I think kind of really speaks to it. And like, Gothic horror is also rooted in racial anxiety. Like, let's not fucking, there's a lot of racism in it too. But a lot of the time, the way that monstrosity is figured in the Gothic is about anxieties about what does it mean to be a proper man? What does it mean to do masculinity wrong? What does it mean for a woman to be outside of quote-unquote her proper place? How is queerness and kind of either like, homosexuality or some kind of trans identity, how is that like dangerous and subversive towards society? We see this in Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde, which is kind of like a massive metaphor about like a gay man who like, finds an avenue through which to express his unspeakable perverse desires and then is eventually like kills himself before being outed by a lawyer and a like doctor. We see this in Carmilla, which is about like literally a predatory lesbian vampire. We see this even like in Frankenstein, which is fundamentally Frankenstein's sin, right? Is to like take the ability to like procreate away from the quote unquote rightful, heteropatriarchal, natural order of things. And so I wanted to like make the subtext text and just like lean all the way in and be like, yeah, being a werewolf is about being gay. Maybe.
Luke, what mechanics are different in this game versus, say, Dream Askew?
So there's no easy order with which to talk about the way that moves are different, so I'm just kind of like plunge in and do it all at once. There is no like strong, regular, weak move structure in this game. Instead, there are just two kinds of moves. And those are inhibited moves and transgressive moves. And inhibited moves, when you, like, give into the pressures of society and when you, like, act in the ways that are, like, expected on you and enforced on you by the world. And when we acknowledge the ways in which, even as queer people, we internalize some, like, really toxic bullshit. When you do that, you gain a token, and then you can spend those tokens to make transgressive moves, which kind of move you towards this liberation and this like self-expression and this ability to build kind of like healthier, more supportive communities. So there's that. I tinkered with the setting elements a little because like now they come with aesthetics because I love writing lists of aesthetics. And then the other kind of like big thing in there is there's a thing that Riley Rethel did in Venture, which is like introspective kind of heroic fantasy, Bob, where it's like choose who you are and who you're not. And I love that. I think it's so good and clever in that game.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did that here and then added to the list of things you are and things you're not gender options. And specifically the way that it's framed here is choose 2 ways you see yourself and 2 ways society sees you. And so this opens up space for people to be like, hey, like I want to play with the ways in which my character is expected to perform masculinity or femininity but doesn't identify with that, or the ways in which like society doesn't view me in those ways but I identify in those ways. So there's room for people to kind of like lean all the way into the gendered kind of dimensions and readings of some of these Gothic archetypes. But there's also space if people don't want to relive like the kind of trauma that they have to deal with in real life, for people to kind of like pull back and let that just be subtext. I felt like it would have been deeply revisionist and dishonest of me to pretend that like there was a really heavy like charge of gender in the way that the Gothic presents a bunch of these like monstrous archetypes. But I also didn't want to be like, hey everyone, like because this game takes seriously and honors the fact that like homophobia was a massive problem in Victorian England, you must therefore sign up to like deal with intense period accurate homophobia when you play this game. I wasn't here to do that.
What's your favorite move or mechanic in the game and why?
I have 2 answers because I can never be concise. I just really love the name prompts in this game. I'm really proud of them. I love to be like, yes, name your character whatever you want, as long as it is an unlucky name, a biblical name, an archaic name, or a name foretelling only sorrow. If you're the game. You any name, but it has to be one of those. But then the other one is in the same way that the default action of Dream Askew and Dream Apart is take action leaving yourself vulnerable. The default action of this game, and like every playbook has it as a transgressive move, is to ask, how can I show that I love you as you are? Because I think like that is so key to kind of like the model of like liberatory healing queer community that I think this game is trying to articulate. And it's also a really key theme in the television show that I really love, that is like a big part of this game, which is Penny Dreadful, a great show, though also deeply problematic in the same way that the Gothic often is.
No dice, no masters.
And now we come to No Dice, No Masters, where our guest hosts an aspect of the game for a little bit of actual play. Let's see this thing in action. The Grand Guignol. Luke, kick us off. What would you like to delve into with a little bit of taste of the game?
Yeah, so the thing I thought we could do that might be fun is flesh out some setting elements. Because I think, you know, we've talked about them a lot, and also I think, you know, they are one of the pieces of Bob tech that is most distinct from PBTA games more generally. So I thought we could look at the 6 setting elements and each kind of like pick one that we're like, yeah, that one excites me, and then kind of work through them as a group and kind of like flesh them out a little.
Well, that sounds fun.
Yeah, sounds like a great idea.
So Rich H, do either of you have one that you're just like, hell yeah, that sounds like fun?
I'm also going to play as the sins of the past, if you don't mind.
I'm interested in the embrace of night.
Of course. All right. It feels like we got 2 like really interior things there. So I think I'm gonna commit to some more structural oppression. I'm gonna also play the blood that flows and get to talk about Karl Marx and metaphor. Cool. So who wants to go first and kind of like lead us through their setting element and kind of like work together to flesh it out?
Do you want us to read the intro blurb on each one to give the listeners an idea of what the
I think
elements are all about?
I think as we work through each one, I think that's a good place to like open with. Yeah, so do either of you want to go first? I'm happy to lead in, if that'd be easiest.
I've got it. You also play the Embrace of Night. The darkness is generous and kind and comforting. It hides us from those we fear and holds us close when we are lonely, and whispers that it's okay to be the monster that they claim us. Because we're special. It's been waiting just for us, and it has such plans. So to create the Embrace of Night, we need to choose 3 to 5 aesthetics, 3 desires, and probably talk a little bit about it.
Yeah.
I won't read the full list of 3 to 5 aesthetics. Luckily, we all have a copy of the game. I think I'm most intrigued by the idea of tolling bells. That seems very suitable and fitting for a Grand Guignol. Any other aesthetics folks like there?
It's interesting because it's right there next to it. I really like the shadow of wings. That feels like a thing that we can do. There's a lot of both subtle and like very, very kind of dramatic ways that can aesthetically feature in a scene.
I'm particularly fond of cracked stained glass. I think that says both a lot about aesthetics and the culture of our city.
Yeah, I think the 3 aesthetics there, at least in my mind, seem to say that there's probably a large presence of churches, at least. Like, at least the aesthetics of churches, from the cracked stained glass to the idea of tolling bells. And of course, tolling bells could be evident in other ways, like a tolling bell that all is well.
Or ask not for whom the bell tolls. Yeah.
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah, is there like, do we want to pick one more to round it off, Rich? Or are you happy with those 3?
To pair with tolling bells, perhaps distorted voices being an aspect of the Embrace of Night.
Yeah.
So what are the 3 desires of the Embrace of Night? We have a number. I think I'll read them. Worship, obedience, vulnerability, uncomfortable intimacy, rebellion, bloodshed, to overthrow normalcy, exclusivity, corruption, and revelation.
I would like, just right out of the gate, I think exclusivity is a very strong choice. Satan doesn't want to share, is the thing.
And I think because we have the blood that flows, I will avoid bloodshed, but that was one that was a little appealing. But I think I'll avoid it because I don't want to step on the toes of that other setting element. Since I mentioned church, I think a desire might also be worship. Exclusivity and worship do seem to be pretty closely aligned. Maybe there are a couple of factions in the Embrace of Night. Is that a thing you can do in a setting element?
I think it depends on the setting element. The vibe of the Embrace of Night overall is like, what does the Satan proxy of this like Gothic imagining look like? And the ways in which like monstrousness tempts you to like go further in that direction. But I think the other thing with like desires is people are complicated, and the world is messy, and like sometimes a person has more things they want than are strictly like always pursuable.
I would slide in rebellion if you want to put forth the idea of maybe there is a potential for different factions and disagreements. I mean, it's a pattern with religious faiths around the world, right? Eventually you come to a disagreement.
Yeah, and I think rebellion is really productive there, right? Because like, does that mean that they want like the characters to rebel against them? Does it mean they want to lead a rebellion against heaven? Right? Like, does it mean that there is factional pressure within the Embrace of... Like, a lot of possibilities there that we can play to find out.
Cool. Is there anything else we should do with the Embrace of Night?
I think reading out the pick up when is a good way to round it off.
We pick up this setting element when someone is alone, feels lost, afraid, or monstrous, or longs for what they can't or shouldn't have.
Cool. Rach, do you want to go next, or do you want to round us off with the sins of the
I'll go
past?
next.
Yep, cool. And we can finish with some predatory capitalism.
You also play as the sins of the past. Maybe you were born in London, maybe far away, but everyone has a past. Wrongs they've done or suffered, people who've loved or hurt them, lives they've changed or ruined. You can run as far as you like, but you can't escape what you've done. So again, we have a list of quite a few aesthetics that I'm not going to go into in detail. The one that grabs me and, well, my love of communication as a motif is telegrams.
Ooh.
The idea of these cryptic, vague messages coming in from who knows where. I mean, they might claim to come from a family member, but you don't know for sure.
And like all the other characters are like, what does this contextless message mean? Now I'm really suspicious of you.
I mean, it does leave a paper trail, unlike a phone call.
I really like fresh starts as a thing that people can try for. And, how successful will that be kind of is another whole question.
I think coupled with fresh starts, I like the idea of fake names, the idea of a name in one place and a person having another name somewhere else.
Think of the amount of power if you're able to connect those names together.
The power of a true name.
Or like the intimacy of telling someone what your name either used to be or is now.
And to round it all up, thinking of something that might bring these all together in a cohesive whole. Keepsakes, I think.
Yeah.
The idea that, you can try to move beyond your past, but you're always taking something with you, and there's something it might seem like a charming little souvenir, but is it actually reflective of something you can't let go of?
Yeah. I like that.
So if desires were to choose three from the following list: consequences, secrets kept, misery, personal growth, dramatic irony, homecoming, repentance, closure, entrenchment, and secrets revealed. Obviously, secrets revealed is going to be my starting gambit for a desire. That's a good drive forward. Let's go bare all of our characters' secrets.
I gotta go with homecoming. There's just nothing quite as awkward and dramatic as returning to a place that you've left.
Yeah, I really like entrenchment. Obviously, the characters can do whatever they want to do, but as far as like what this setting element wants from them, it wants them to like get like more and more deeply committed to old patterns and modes of behavior that aren't necessarily good for them. It wants them to double down. It
does bring up the desire of homecoming as well. It's that duality there of like, you could go home again, but do you want to?
Yeah,
Can you not avoid it?
Is that healthy for you, actually?
So for the sins of the past, you would pick up this setting element when someone reveals part of their past, contacts someone they once knew, or wishes they could forget.
All right, cool. I also play The Blood That Flows. Something terrible lurks in the heart of London, cruel and rich and thirsty. It feeds on misery and drains people dry, preying on the working poor even as it strolls amongst the corridors of power. Which has killed more, the vampire's fangs or the landlord's endless greed? Yeah, so we need to circle 3 to 5 aesthetics. I would like to open out of the gate with sharp smiles in all of the literal and metaphorical ways that a smile can be sharp.
I feel interested in family crests.
You stole it!
Snatched! It just helps me come up with how to describe someone, things to put on their clothing, things to make them easily identifiable. I really like that idea of an aesthetic there.
I'm going to go with wolf pelts. It brings a little bit more of a dramatic, rustic edge and that blurring of the city and the beyond the city.
Yeah, for sure. I also really love, it's like slightly indirect, I really love dingy windows. Just that, like, wherever vampires are, whether literal or figurative, there's not a bright light. It's just not a thing that you find around them. And I think I'm feeling a 5th aesthetic here.
Okay.
Does either of you have a thought as for another one to kind of round us off?
I think it would add a different tonality if we had venomous gossip.
Ooh.
What do you think, Rach?
I could see how it fits. I could definitely see how it fits, especially if there are other setting elements where these ideas of secrets and messages, being passed around behind people's backs. Gossip would fit right in.
Yeah, it reinforces some fun stuff.
And everything about the aesthetics we've chosen feel to me very reserved and conservative, but if you want gossip, it kind of pulls those side characters or NPCs or whatever the heck we call them in BRB. It pulls those setting elements in to be more active, to engage with our main characters.
Yeah, for sure. And then we need to choose 3 desires, and our options are excess, control, fearful compliance, ignorance, desperation, acquisition, fawning adulation, lives wrung dry, good sport, and plausible deniability. I think these vampires want good sport.
That's acceptably horrific.
Yeah, I think just to give another reason for them to be stepping out into the world and coming into contact.
Let's also go with plausible deniability.
Oof.
I like the idea of cover-ups.
Damn, we really are just recreating capitalism, huh?
Shh, don't say it too loud, they'll hear.
Well, I think I'll mix in a desire for fawning adulation. Sure, they're a good sport, but having some sycophants around is always nice too.
Yeah, the way in which fawning adulation and wanting their prey to be good sport interact is like, ugh, really gross in the best possible way. We pick up the blood that flows when someone has resources worth taking, interacts with their betters, or wishes their place in society were different. And yeah, then what we, normally we would take that, we would take our characters and we would go on to the Welcome to London sheet and figure out what our city looks like overall and what is going on at the moment.
Wow, that is very intriguing. That is definitely some stuff I could jump into right away. I really appreciate you giving us the opportunity to see a bit of Grand Guignol in action, Luke.
You could definitely get a sense for all of the story hooks you could hang a potential character off of.
Well, Luke, thank you so much for coming on our Blogging Outside Blogging series and sharing with us Grand Guignol.
Luke, if our listeners are looking for more of your work or want to check out your other projects, where can they find you online?
Yeah, you can find me always on Twitter at Wildwoods Games. You can find and buy any of my games at gamesfromthewildwood.itch.io. There's like a massive pile of community copies available for this game specifically because I wanted it. I wanted queer people and to be able to access it. That was really important to me. I also am like the creative director of a queer actual play podcast about kind of messy relationships and introspective character drama. And you can find us on Twitter at feelingsfirst_.
Fantastic, and thank you once again for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. This has been a blast.
Plus One Forward is a production of the Gauntlet community, Richard Rogers and Rach Shelkey. You can find us at gauntlet-rpg.com or follow us on Twitter at +1FWD. If you would like to support our show, visit our Patreon site at patreon.com/gauntlet. The games mentioned on this show use the Apocalypse engine, which is a creation of Vincent and Magay Baker. The music for Plus One Forward is from the Savage Aural Hotbed CD Gomi Daiko. The songs used are Gomi Daiko, Metal Version, and Drowning Attitude. You can find more amazing tunes by Savage Aural Hotbed on their website, www.savageauralhotbed.com.
Hi listeners, I wanted to let you know that Hearts of Wulin is now available to pre-order. Hearts of Wulin is a tabletop role-playing game of wuxia melodrama, powered by the Apocalypse. In Hearts of Wulin, players take the role of skilled martial artists in a world of rival clans, conspiracies, and obligations. The game emulates films like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Chinese wuxia TV series like The Smiling Proud Wanderer and Fox Volant of the Snowy Mountain, and Chinese martial arts novels from the second half of the 20th century. In these tales, romance is as dangerous as a blade. Everyone has ties to factions, loves they can't quite express, and secrets which will shake them to their core. As in the source material, stories in Hearts of Wulin are driven by the characters' duties, romantic desires, and entanglements with other characters. You can pre-order the hardcover edition of Hearts of Wulin by following the link in the show notes. And as always, thanks so much for your support.